Today, we are going to talk about the cognition. The cognition appear to see in our thinking. Its effect of an interface on behavior do not appear as measurable as a perceptual effect. When a display is poorly designed for cognition, users tend to blame themselves rather than the interface. I use a display daily that causes error and time loss to poor cognition design such as ATM. Fluid ability are those abilities needed in unfamiliar, rapidly changing situations. For example, navigating an unfamiliar city or learning strategy. This fluid ability can be broken down into perceptual speed, working memory capacity, attention, listening ability, spatial ability, and environmental support. Perceptual speed can be measured by digit symbol substitution test. The task is to examine the symbol, figure out what number is associated with it, and to write down the appropriate number in the blank below each symbol. How many numbers are correctly written in a 90-second period is the digit symbol score. Cut off score on the digit symbol substitution test as a function of the age. A low score on that test, fewer completed items indicate a slower perceptual speed. It's not indicate on person score on the test. You can see that the more age, the more slow perceptual speed. Working memory is the ability to remember information while also working on another task. For example, remember a telephone number while talking on the telephone. We use alphabet span test to measure the working memory. When comparing working memory performance between younger and older adults, the difference in capability are dramatic at the group level. However, even within younger adults, there is substantial individual variation. Callers must remember their task goal as well as the option pairing while listening and comprehending the spoken menu. The guideline for working memory is that the telephone menu choose less than 7 spoken options to accommodate short-term memory situation. In the design of visual display for consumer product, the user interface designer and engineer are constrained by the physical size of the display, which may limit the amount of available information. The challenge in display design is to present the appropriate amount of information on an as-needed basis. This is an example of Basecamp information that shows on the Apple Watch. Attention can either be selective or divided. Selective attention is the situation where one is trying to pay attention to one thing. Example, understanding the option on an ATM screen while trying to actively ignore something else, such as traffic noise. Divided attention situations are those where one is trying to pay attention to multiple things at the same time. For example, talking on the mobile phone while withdrawing cash from an ATM. In both situations, this study has shown that older adults are at a disadvantage compared to other age groups. Attentional resource allocation shows significantly for older adults since they have a smaller amount of attentional resource, making a small chunk of information at a time by using a wizard-style interface. The selective attention demand are relatively reduced compared to the form, because only a small part of the whole form requires immediate attention. Creating an effective environment support requires two commonly used methods in human factor and usability. The first is to create a user profile that accurately characterizes the intended user population, capability, and limitation. Second is a task analysis with enough detail of tasks to be able to determine whether the intended user capability will be existed. Adults have a wealth of knowledge and experience with certain topics. Taking advantage of this knowledge can compensate for limitation in memory, attention, or spatial ability in performing computer-based navigation tasks. An example of such an approach is a text-based interface. Listening ability is the ability to tackle and understand the novel situation. It is the ability that one uses when faced with a new television remote control or visit an unfamiliar website. Psychologists measure listening ability using Darwin progressive method that require test taker to determine logical sequence. Spatial ability helps a person mentally manipulate location-based representation of the world. A mental model is a mental representation of the physical system. a map of sort. For example, menu can be sorted into one level or two level hierarchical menu. The second category of ability, collectively termed crystallized intelligence or crystallized knowledge, represent the sum of knowledge that one has gained through a lifetime of formal education and life experience. The figure shows the score on the vocabulary test. It shows that with increasing age, word knowledge measured by the vocabulary test also increases. The older adult in this sample may have more education than the younger adults. Knowledge and experience could be considered a type of everyday intelligence that can enable successful technology performance. We can measure the knowledge by using the everyday cognition battery, as you can see in this example. Mental models are discrete knowledge structure of bundle of related information that are developed over time. If the mental model of designer and user are not the same, it is likely that the system is difficult to use. Jitterbug mobile phones are simplified for older adults. The display doesn't contain a signal strength indicator. Instead, the user opens the phone and checks for a dial tone. The rationale is that older users who may have experience with the mobile phone but a great amount of experience with a landline phone. Metaphor is an user interface visual, action, and procedure that exploits specific knowledge that users already have of other domains. For example, we can use a desktop metaphor for office users since they are familiar with the environment. Schools of morphologic design tend to look realistic but not work like it should be. As a result, the Apple interface has been changed recently to be the flat design. The arrangement of information can also aid the user in easily reading and in finding information. For example, the layout of information on a newspaper page helps the reader eye scan for relevant information and utilize expectation. In this example, the layout was designed by using the grid. It is easy for the user to see the organization of the information. It may become confusing for some users as their knowledge and expectation of how to use a web browser clash with their interaction expectation of a desktop application. A confusion arises when users must shift their mental set from web browser to the desktop application. Hierarchical folder require users to click through so many levels in order to get a specific content. It usually doesn't work well. Users easily become lost, distracted, or simply decide it is too much work and give up. So, for deeper hierarchy, it is critical to provide alternative navigation options, shortcuts that lead directly to the lower level. Users can browse alphabetically for information. This is a general design guideline such as avoid a very deep hierarchy, provide a clear indication of where the user is in the information space. These example guidelines are not a strict rule, so please be careful when you apply it. Thank you for watching.